Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome, and I'm here to break down UFC Austin, which goes down in Austin, Texas, this Saturday. We're back after the 1 week break. We're back with fights, and man, this fight night is absolutely fire. From top to bottom, there's plenty of good fights. There's fights that are well matched that are likely going to give us barn burners, fire fights. I'm so excited for this card. It's definitely up there in probably the top 3 fight nights that we've had for the entire year of 2023. So super excited for the fights, super excited to break it all down, and we'll get there in just one moment. Now, normally I would be saying, just before we get into the breakdowns, there will be a Base AI recap, but I'm going to take a little bit of a break from the Base AI recaps for now. I might do them, if there's a special event, a pay-per-view, or if something crazy has happened on one of the events, but we've done pretty much every recap from every event from an AI perspective with the UFC prediction software. We post all the results, and we still will every single week to the MMA Play 365 website. There's plenty of videos on that Base AI specific playlist on YouTube, so if you are wanting to learn how to use the AI for a betting perspective, then we've got plenty of education pieces on that channel, on those playlists as well, and on those videos. So for now, there isn't going to be a Base AI recap. The AI will still run. We'll still post the results on MMAplay365.com. But yeah, just a little bit of a break from the AI. It's just, like I say, there's plenty of education, plenty of bits around implied probabilities and values. And yeah, if you are interested in AI and in AI for UFC and MMA, then make sure you go to youtube.com/MMAplay365 and find that Base AI specific playlist. But now let's jump straight into these breakdowns. And of course, as always, we start in the main event. We've got a 5-round fight between Beneil Dariush and Arman Tsarukyan. Now, this is a really good fight. And look, with Beneil Dariush, it's like you don't really know what to expect. If you go back and listen historically to my breakdowns of Dariush, of course, I always recognize that Dariush is a solid fighter, but I do tend to find myself picking against him quite a lot. And spoiler alert, it's going to be the same here again, but he always shows up, and more often than not, he always proves me wrong as well. And again, we could face a similar situation in this fight. The thing is with Dariush, he's so well-rounded. His striking has improved exponentially over, the last number of years. He really puts it well together from a striking perspective. Good hands, he's got power in his hands as well. Hard body kicks, just because he doesn't care if you take him down, because his jiu-jitsu is so good. It's high level. He's got that old man strength. Again, not calling him an old man, but he's got, he's a little bit older than a lot of the fighters that are at the top of the division, including Tsarukyan. And like I said, he does big brother a lot of these fighters. And even look at the Gamrot fight. Gamrot tried to get the better of him wrestling, tried to get the better of him grappling, and he couldn't. And that speaks volumes, because in my opinion, Gamrot's one of the best wrestlers and grapplers in the entire division. And even he really struggled with Dariush, to the point where Dariush just ended up defending everything and then just really running through Gamrot, which is something that you don't really see, and you won't really hear anybody say that too often. So from Dariush's perspective, he's got everything. The problem is, in front of him is Arman Tsarukyan now. Tsarukyan's had his moments. You look at the Joaquim Silva fight, there was a moment in that fight where it looked a little bit sketchy, but more often than not, he comes out on top. And again, we're going back to the Gamrot fight. Gamrot beat Tsarukyan. It was very close. Some people argue that Tsarukyan should have won the fight. I personally think it's one of those fights where, if you run that exact fight 10 times using 3 different judges, you'll probably get a different scorecard and a different outcome each time. It was just one of those 50-50 fights, in my opinion, that really could have gone either way, and it went Gamrot's way that night. Now, obviously, MMA math is a thing, but not a thing that you should really overly rely on when it comes down to breaking fights down, analysing and betting, because otherwise you would just be betting Dariush. Dariush beats Gamrot, but Gamrot beats Tsarukyan, so Dariush fights Tsarukyan, and surely, because of MMA math, Dariush beats Tsarukyan, and I just don't feel that that's the case. Look, Tsarukyan's getting better each time that we see him. He's a fighter that, again, he's got decent striking, but his wrestling and grappling and his scrambling ability is solid. Really, really solid. So the one interesting aspect of this fight that I'm looking forward to is, can Tsarukyan do what Gamrot couldn't against Dariush and what other fighters have been unable to do? And that's to take Dariush down and control him and get the better of him on the mat. Now, when you compare, and I know we're going back a few years now, but when you look at Tsarukyan's UFC debut and what happened with the Islam Makhachev fight, look, Makhachev beat Tsarukyan, but Tsarukyan was the first person to ever take Makhachev down, to hit a takedown against him from a wrestling perspective. And Tsarukyan's grappling and scrambling ability in that fight at that level against Makhachev shows that he is a high caliber wrestler and grappler. And I just feel that that might be enough with the youthful energy as well that Tsarukyan's going to have to maybe just take this one from Dariush. Dariush just seemed to do this where he goes on this winning streak and he gets that big fight, the one that's going to level him up, and then falls short a little bit. And I kind of feel that the same might happen again here. From a striking perspective, I think Dariush is going to be the better striker here, but I think that Tsarukyan is calm enough and gauges range well enough to be able to stay out of anything too powerful from Dariush. And if Tsarukyan just keeps going and going with the wrestling, I do think that he can get topside of Dariush. If he can get Dariush pinned down, as in like both shoulders on the mat, and settled for maybe 10, 20, 30 seconds, then I think that's where we're going to see Tsarukyan shine. I think it's going to be that initial part of actually taking Dariush down and settling the shoulders on the mat is going to be the difficult part. But I think that Tsarukyan can do that. And over 5 rounds, I think he's going to have the gas tank just to be a little bit relentless here if he needs to be. And even if he's not getting the takedowns or not controlling for long periods of time on the mat, I think the rinse and repeat style might favour Tsarukyan here. And it's a bit like we always say with Merab Dvalishvili, like he doesn't spend a lot of time on top of his opponents, but the relentlessness of him, the constant takedowns, the mat returns, it's just enough when there's enough of them. And I think that's going to be the case in this fight. But look, if Dariush comes out in this fight and stuffs the takedowns and stands back up constantly and starts getting the better of Tsarukyan on the feet, I think that's a legit possibility. So when you're looking at the betting lines and you're looking at Tsarukyan being a minus 250 favourite, bigger in some spots depending on what bookies you're looking at, I think that's a crazy betting line if I'm being honest. This fight, in my opinion, should be much shorter. I'm not saying that it should be a pick-em. I'm not saying Tsarukyan should be an underdog, but if Tsarukyan was like minus 150, minus 160, I think that's more of a true line in this fight. I think the line's too wide, but still, from a prediction and pick perspective, I'm picking Arman Tsarukyan to win this fight. And in the next fight, in the co-main event, we have actually got a relatively new fight here. It's supposed to have been Bobby Green versus Dan Hooker, which was actually a 5-round co-main event as well, which would have been sick, but Dan Hooker unfortunately has pulled out, and in steps Jalin Turner. And the fight is no longer a 5-round co-main event, it's a 3-round co-main event. But listen, from what I've heard, I didn't know this prior to a few days ago, is Jalin Turner and Bobby Green don't like each other at all. Something to do with some issues in a gym somewhere. So again, that could be one of a million things that have happened inside a gym. But again, not 100% of how true that is, but it's just an interesting aspect of this fight if they actually don't like each other. We normally see Bobby Green having fun in there, you know, trash talking a little bit, but if he genuinely doesn't like somebody, I'm interested to see that version of Bobby Green. But look, short notice for Jalin Turner. However, it does seem like Jalin Turner is the type of fighter that's always going to be in the gym, that's always going to be training. He's still, I wouldn't say relatively new in his career, but he's still got a long way to go in the division and he's still got the ability to do it. Obviously, he had the setback against Dan Hooker, and he's now looking to come in against Bobby Green and take or scalp that name and that win inside of a co-main event of a good fight night. So from a stylistic perspective, I think Bobby Green here, I mean, the path to victory straight off the bat to me seems to be to wrestle and grapple, but like Jalin Turner's got decent jiu-jitsu. He's not got bad takedown defense either. He's going to be really tall, really long. He's good with his shots straight down the middle, knees, uppercuts, that type of stuff. So if Bobby Green is shooting plenty of takedowns, then I do think that he's giving opportunities for Jalin Turner to A, land something that straight when Bobby Green's coming into the range, or B, just to get hit with something whilst they're in close and I kind of feel that it's probably not a great stylistic fight for Bobby Green now. I didn't mind him against Hooker, I'll be honest. I didn't really come to a conclusion of a winner in that fight. But in this fight, I do think it's a tougher fight for Bobby Green just because Turner is tall, he is long, he's got tricky jiu-jitsu, he's got good movement himself, he's got good straight punches, he's got good knees. Like I said, dropping that fight to Dan Hooker, I don't think was the best look, but I also think that Jalin Turner just had an off night, and I talk about this all the time with any athlete. It doesn't make a difference whether it's MMA, whether it's boxing, whether it's football, whether it's tennis, cricket, whatever sport. Every single athlete at the highest level has an off night, off game, off match, off performance, whatever it is. And I kind of feel that Jalin Turner had that off performance against Dan Hooker. If they run that fight back, I'm not sold that Dan Hooker does that again. But Jalin Turner, like I said, for me is the full package. Like I say, tall, long, good defensive wrestling. He can offensively wrestle himself as well. Really good grappling, but he's got that nasty, dangerous striking, the deceptive power with the straight punches, the elbows, the knees, the dynamic striking. And I just feel that all that put together is going to make it difficult for Bobby Green to really start pulling ahead in this fight. I don't think what happened with Bobby Green last time against Grant Dawson with the quick KO is going to happen here. Of course, it was nice to cash Bobby Green at that plus 300 line that I got, but yeah, I don't think that's going to happen again here. I think Jalin Turner is going to be a little bit too athletic. That youthful energy, but also the deceptive power in the straight shots. And if Bobby Green does decide to go to the mat, I think Jalin Turner's jiu-jitsu is really sneaky. Again, really deceptive, a really deceptive skill set and quality in regards to the jiu-jitsu for Jalin Turner. So yeah, I think it's going to be tough for Bobby Green. I don't think he's going to be out the fight or anything like that. I think it'll be competitive, but I do see Jalin Turner just pulling away with the rounds, pulling away on the volume. And if he is taken down, I think that he's got enough in that jiu-jitsu tank, so to speak, to be successful enough to be able to stand back up to his feet or sweep or reverse. So yeah, even though it's short notice, I do believe Turner will have been training anyway, just on a day-to-day basis, ready to step in and make that weight and make the fight and answer that phone to the UFC. So yeah, for those reasons, I'm picking Jalin Turner to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is a fun fight. This is probably my favourite fight of the night, or at least the one that I'm most intrigued to see. And I also feel it's going to be very split as well from the public predictions as well. So we've got Rob Font versus Deiveson Figueiredo. So Deiveson Figueiredo, of course, multi-time former flyweight champion, always known for being absolutely massive for the division and weighs a ton when he actually steps into the cage to fight, which means that his weight cuts have been extreme. You know, there's been times where he's looked terrible on the scales and he's really struggled to make the weight, and he's teased this bantamweight debut for quite a while. In fact, I'm sure he teased it before his last fight, but then still fought at flyweight anyway, which surprised a lot of people. But now he's actually made the move up to bantamweight, and I'm so excited to see how he looks, because I kind of feel like it's a smaller version of the Alex Pereira situation. Like, look, Pereira killed himself getting down to middleweight, went up to light heavyweight, has looked great, looks massive, huge, filled out. He's not lost any of the power. He's not lost, or he's gained, in my opinion, probably a little bit of cardio. He looks solid, and I think that we're going to see the exact same things with Figueiredo. I think Figueiredo is going to have more in the gas tank this time. We do know that, especially early on in his UFC career, he was wrestling relatively heavily, but then that wrestling stopped, and you've got to wonder why it stopped. Did he just fall in love with the KO, or were the weight cuts really taking its toll to the point where he didn't feel comfortable wrestling too heavily in case he gassed out and couldn't continue? But even still at flyweight, he's been in high-pace, intense fights for 5 rounds and looked relatively fine throughout the later rounds as well. So I think that everything that he had at flyweight is just going to be elevated a little bit more here at bantamweight. Like I say, better cardio. He's always been a big puncher and packing power. I think he's going to have more power at bantamweight as well. It's just, in this fight with Rob Font, where it becomes dangerous is Rob Font's really tall and long, so he is going to have a 3-inch height and reach advantage. But it's weird with Rob Font, because even though a lot of the time he's the same height as his opponents and the same reach, he always looks like he's longer and taller and has a bigger reach, and that's probably just his stature and his posture and the way he fights, but he's genuinely going to be, in my opinion, or at least look much taller and longer than Figueiredo. So Figueiredo, it's going to be on him to close the distance, because Rob Font will be happy just to sit on the outside and strike inwards, whether that's the straight punches. He's got some of the best boxing in the UFC, not just the division, in the UFC, and he's got good low kicks as well. So he'll be able just to stay on the outside if that's what he needs to do, and I think it'll be on Figueiredo to be able to, to have to come forward, get into range and really start landing on Rob Font. But again, if this is a Figueiredo with a better gas tank and a lesser weight cut, and he's feeling physically just much better, then he's not going to have that issue in closing the distance and being aggressive, because that's his style. He prefers to be the one coming forwards. It's just here he's going to be coming forwards and likely having to, deal with a jab or a straight 1-2 down the middle landing on him as he's closing the distance. So he's going to have some stuff to figure out, but it's only a 3-round fight as well. So I kind of feel that Figueiredo can really come out at 100 miles an hour here and be fine for 3 rounds, especially at upper weight class. I don't think this is going to be a situation where he's not used to the weight and he gasses out really quickly because of it. I think he's going to thrive on the move up in weight class. So the problem that I've got with Rob Font on the other side is, look, you can't ignore the Rob Font and the Jose Aldo and the Marlon Vera fights, where Rob Font can look great, but he can also be got at as well. The durability is starting to be a little bit of a question mark, a little bit of a red flag, because he can be hurt. We've seen him dropped and rocked. And I'm pretty sure in that Marlon Vera fight, or it's the Jose Aldo fight, or maybe a combination of both, where he was winning pretty much every round, but then he got hurt badly or rocked or dropped at the end of pretty much every round that he was winning, and then ended up losing the rounds because of that. And the thing is with Figueiredo, I think he's going to be more dangerous than Marlon Vera in regards to being aggressive and power. I think he's going to be more dangerous than Jose Aldo for the same reasons. But then Rob Font in his last fight got controlled for I think it was 23 minutes or maybe 20 minutes of a 25-minute fight against Sandhagen with the wrestling. So again, we might see Figueiredo wrestle here if his cardio is a little bit better and he's had less of a gas tank. And I just feel that it's going to be a really great fight. I think that Figueiredo is going to have more work to do, because he's got to get past that long range of Font. But I think if he can do that, he can have some real success against Font, whether that's looking to land power shots and hurt him, drop him, knock him out, or whether that's to level change in the wrestling as well. Where, look, Rob Font typically has always had good takedown defense and a good get-up game. But against Sandhagen, I don't know, it's just, is there a decline setting in Rob Font? It's going to be interesting to see. I think it's a great fight, well-matched fight for Deiveson Figueiredo's bantamweight debut. They clash really well from a stylistic perspective as well, but for the purposes of the pick and prediction, I'm going to be picking Deiveson Figueiredo to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got another banger here. I also feel it's going to be another fight that is probably going to be split on opinions as well. We've got Sean Brady versus Kelvin Gastelum. Now, the interesting aspect of this fight is that it's at welterweight. Now, for those that haven't been around the scene, or if you are a bit of a casual fan, or you have just got into the UFC, and the predictions and the betting and all that fun stuff within the last few years, the one thing that you might not know with Kelvin Gastelum is this is the first time that Kelvin Gastelum is going to be fighting at welterweight in over 7 years. So 12 fights ago, he fought Johnny Hendricks at welterweight. He then started having issues with the weight. I think he did always have an issue with welterweight. And the thing is, he's got a welterweight frame. So the fact that he was having the issues really confused a lot of people, and there was questions of his commitment and dedication to the weight cuts, and he was almost fighting up at middleweight just because he didn't want to have that weight cut, but he was fighting up at middleweight really undersized. And to be fair to him, he got all the way to that, to those title fights, and he had a really successful middleweight career. He's fought the best of the best, and he's always been competitive. So it's interesting now to why he's dropping down in weight. And the one thing that, and I actually forgot to mention this in the last fight breakdown with Deiveson Figueiredo, is the move to fight ready MMA for Kelvin Gastelum, I think, was a genius move. And we saw in his last fight against Chris Curtis, I know it was very controversial and people said that Curtis would have won if, that moment where he was dropped in the second round due to the clash of heads wasn't deemed a knockdown by the judges. But, you know, all that aside, Kelvin Gastelum looked the best that we'd seen him in a long time. He looked sharp, he looked light on his feet, he looked in great shape, great energy. Now, Fight Ready MMA has the Neuroforce 1 physical strength and conditioning training performance program inside that gym, where it's one of the best in the world, where it enables fighters to be able to, you know where the bodies are and be able to fight at the optimal weight and perform at the best of their ability at that weight. So I'm just wondering whether Kelvin Gastelum has been on that Neuroforce 1 program and is dropping down in weight because of the results that performance program has delivered to him. So he's been able to now drop his weight in a great way where he's going to be full of energy. And again, this might be one of those, if you're looking to bet the fight, it might be one of those genuinely, and I don't say this a lot, but it might be one of those where you have to wait until the weigh-ins to see what Gastelum's like. If Gastelum steps on that scale and looks really depleted and is really struggling with the weight, or maybe he misses weight and he needs an hour to make the weight again, I'm not sure what the Texas rules are from that commission, but if he's looking a little bit sketchy on the scales, then I think it might be one of those where Sean Brady does actually win the fight, because I'm not totally convinced until I see it. But if he steps on that scales and looks great, then we know that it's very likely he's been on the Neuroforce 1 performance program, and he's probably going to perform really well as well. And the thing is, if we get the same Gastelum that we got against Chris Curtis just in this fight, down a weight, against Sean Brady, I think it's a nightmare stylistic matchup for Sean Brady. It's just, do we get that version of Gastelum? We don't know until, well, we're not going to know until he performs inside the cage, but we'll have a really good idea on the weigh-ins of what sort of shape that Gastelum's in. But if Gastelum's in a bad shape, then I think Sean Brady is going to beat Gastelum relatively comfortably. So I do think it really does depend on how Gastelum looks on the scales and how he performs. But from a stylistic perspective, we're just going to run with, look, Gastelum is going to fight like Gastelum. Yeah, we can't assume that he's going to look bad on the scales. So I do think stylistically, Sean Brady's in for a tough fight here. Striking-wise, I think Gastelum's light years ahead of him. Although Brady's striking has been improving, he still does have power, to be fair to him. He wasn't doing too badly against Belal Muhammad. Well, then Belal Muhammad did finish him. And look, without throwing any disrespect at Belal Muhammad, because he's a world-class fighter, he doesn't finish that many fights. So the fact that Brady was stopped by Belal Muhammad with a standing TKO as well, you know, I feel if that was Gastelum in front of Brady, then Brady's probably going out on the mat, on the canvas. But where it gets interesting from Gastelum's perspective is, look, Sean Brady is a very big, strong, tough grappler, legit BJJ black belt under Daniel Gracie. All those guys are really good grapplers. So if Brady can get Gastelum down, then maybe if he, again, like I say, 2 shoulders on the mat, then maybe he can get the better of Gastelum. But Gastelum, although he's not immune to be taken down, he's always had decent defensive wrestling, decent offensive wrestling as well, to be fair. And he's always had decent jiu-jitsu. Like, you very rarely see Gastelum controlled on the mat where he's stuck on his back and he can't really do anything. But again, going back to the weight cut, if he's had a tough cut and that cardio, the gas tank depletes quickly, then again, maybe Brady takes him down and really does, you know, run away with the fight. But if Gastelum has got energy, I feel like he can get back up to his feet, and I just don't think that if this is a good Gastelum, an in-shape Gastelum that we see that's full of energy, I just think he's going to be difficult to take down, and I think he's going to be difficult to keep down, which then means that the fight might have more moments on the feet than the wrestling and the grappling, and that's just where I think Gastelum's so much better. And also, is Gastelum fights southpaw as well, so again, from Brady's perspective, I'm sure Brady's prepared, but I just feel Gastelum's speed, his movement, and also if Brady does try and take Gastelum down, Gastelum, remember, has fought bigger, stronger, heavier guys up at middleweight. So although Brady is big, strong, and heavy for the division, I don't think he's going to be as strong as some of those middleweights that Gastelum's been fighting. So maybe Brady's going to be at a physical disadvantage for the first time in a long time, maybe in forever, against Kelvin Gastelum. So yeah, like I say, it really does hinge for me on what happens on the scales. But pre-fight, pre-weigh-ins, I am picking Kelvin Gastelum to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Punahele Soriano versus Dustin Stoltzfus. And it's an interesting fight. I kind of feel the longer the fight goes on, the more it might favour Dustin Stoltzfus. Early, though, is definitely Soriano. Like, I feel that Soriano really needs to... I don't know exactly what the cause is, so, I can't offer any sort of, like, guidance or advice into what he can do, but he needs to figure out this cardio and the gas tank, because it's really hurting Punahele Soriano. Soriano's got really good striking, he's got good boxing, he's got a wrestling background, his jiu-jitsu's good as well. He's a really good, well-rounded fighter that's explosive with power and has some good durability. And I kind of feel that his skill set could take him quite far in the UFC, but the problem is he tires out very quickly, and I don't know whether it's a pacing issue, I don't know whether it's a diet and nutrition issue, I'm not sure what it is. That's obviously something for Soriano and, his team to be able to figure out, but if they can figure out this cardio issue, then I feel like he's going to have much more success, because in this fight with Stoltzfus, I think Stoltzfus is going to try to wrestle and take him down. So if Stoltzfus is struggling initially to take him down, but still making Soriano work, then it's all money in the bank for Stoltzfus, because I feel like he's got the better cardio. So if what doesn't work in round 1 for Stoltzfus might start working in round 2, maybe halfway in round 2, and then through round 3 if Soriano's tired. But I kind of feel that Stoltzfus, if he can weather an early storm, and the longer the fight goes on, I do think he's got every chance of being able to start slowly pulling away with this fight against Soriano, unless, of course, Soriano's fixed these cardio issues. But the problem with Soriano is I think he's going to be so live early in this fight that I'm not sure if Stoltzfus does survive it. Like I said early on, Soriano's sharp, he's got good speed, good movement, good power, he's got the wrestling background to be able to use that from a defensive perspective if Stoltzfus is shooting takedowns, or he could maybe even take Stoltzfus down as well. Like I say, Soriano's actually, from a skill set perspective, a really, really good fighter, really well-rounded. So it is just the question, does Soriano get Stoltzfus out within the first round and a half, or does he not? I'm kind of siding with that he does. I think that Stoltzfus is going to be looking for the takedown. I think he might leave himself open to be countered a little bit, especially if Soriano's defending early, and maybe Stoltzfus' cardio drops a little bit early before Soriano's cardio drops even more, and then maybe Soriano takes advantage of that. But the hand speed and the power that Soriano's got, and the ability to keep this fight standing, even if it's for the initial parts of the fight, the first round and a half, I think is going to be a real problem. So for those reasons, I'm picking Punahele Soriano to win this fight. And in the next fight, this one could be a fun one as well. It's always fun, of course, when we've got the Carpenter Clay Guida versus Joaquim Silva. Now, like I say, it's an interesting fight. Initially, you look at Clay Guida, he looks old, he's 41 years old, he's had 61 MMA fights, depending on where you look. I think different places have got different records for him. But yeah, we'll go with 61, and that's a lot of fights, and at 41 years old, and to be fair, Guida's been in a lot of wars as well, so you're thinking at 41 that he's, obviously the decline's there, that's obvious, he's not the fighter he once was, but man, like, Guida's still got it, there's still a dog inside of there, and in those 61 fights, the craziest stat is, he's only been finished via KO, TKO 2 times, which is just crazy to think of how many wars he's been in. Again, at this point normally in a fighter's career that's been in a lot of wars and has had 61 fights and he's 41 years old, you look at these fighters and the durability is shot, the cardio is no longer there anymore, and they just struggle to perform how they used to. But Clay Guida just doesn't show any signs of that. He's still got his durability. He's still got better cardio than most fighters have that fight against him. And also, he's still training with absolute killers down at Team Alpha Male, which, ironically, is very similar to what we're seeing from Darren Elkins. Like, Darren Elkins is pretty much similar to Guida. He's older. You would expect more of a decline. You'd expect the thing is with Elkins, his durability is way more shot than what Guida's is, but the cardio's still there. He can still drown younger fighters with the wrestling and grappling, and I kind of feel like Guida's very much the same, except his durability is better. So against Joaquim Silva, I think the best path to victory for Silva here would be to knock Guida out. Silva's got power, it's undeniable, and look, if he does catch Guida, the likelihood is he's going to rock Guida at least, maybe drop him, maybe knock him out. That's the path to victory for Joaquim Silva. But I don't feel that Joaquim Silva is the younger fighter here with the better cardio, the better movement, the better speed, the well-rounded, more well-rounded. I actually think that most of them actually go to Clay Guida. It's just like I say, Joaquim Silva, he trains out of American Top Team now, and, he does have power. And again, I'm just wondering from the betting line perspective whether the line is so wide because of that one moment he had against Tsarukyan. I mentioned that earlier in the Tsarukyan and Dariush breakdown. Joaquim Silva stepped in on short notice and he did have Tsarukyan hurt, so maybe, that's elevating the betting line here. I'm not sure, but I think Clay Guida's a live fighter here. I think if you can get to his wrestling and grappling, which is a concern to be fair, because there are some fights where Guida does have a wrestling advantage, but then yet he stands and strikes, and I'm not quite sure what the reason is for that. It could be anything in regards to, not getting his reads in on a fight, or a fighter's more difficult to read and the takedown entries aren't as obvious. So I don't know, but I feel that if Clay Guida comes into this fight, wrestles offensively and also relentlessly as well, because he's got the cardio to do that, I actually think he can make this fight really, really close. From a striking perspective, if Silva doesn't knock Guida out, I think the numbers are going to be close from a volume perspective as well. So I just feel that, like I say, in fact, the best path to victory, considering everything I've said, might be for Silva to, if Guida does start relentlessly wrestling, maybe Silva wraps up a neck and guillotines him, because the one thing that has happened to Clay Guida is he's been submitted 11 times, and that's from 23 losses, so it's a lot of submission losses. But then even when you look at the decision record, Guida's 16-9 when a fight goes to a decision. So like I say, I think it's just going to be a very close fight. I'm not going to be shocked if Joaquim Silva does start getting the better of him striking and he does potentially hurt him, rock him or knock him out, but I just think Guida's going to be competitive in this fight. I think that Guida's striking's okay. I think if he starts mixing in wrestling and grappling, I think that Joaquim Silva could start getting a little bit tired, not being able to keep up with the pace from Guida. And like I say, we're seeing it with Darren Elkins. Look at Darren Elkins against TJ Brown. TJ Brown was that young, athletic fighter who actually was decent from a wrestling and grappling perspective himself, and also had power within his striking. And Darren Elkins just drowned him, even at the late age that he's at. And I kind of feel Clay Guida might be able to put on that type of performance. So maybe surprising to some people, but I'm picking Clay Guida to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Miesha Tate versus the returning Julia Avila. We haven't seen Julia Avila in a couple of years. Apparently she's had a few injuries. And also I believe that she's had a baby. I could be wrong about that. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that she's had a baby, a couple of injuries, and that's why she's been out for a few years, and now she's back inside the cage. The one thing that I will say is, and this is obviously based on if she has had a baby, is it hasn't happened for a while, but a few years back, I'm going back maybe 4 or 5 years, there was a phase where a lot of the female fighters in the UFC were having babies and then coming back, and I'm not sure the record was actually that great for those women coming back after pregnancy. And the first fight or two was a little bit off. Obviously, a lot happens and changes to a woman's body during that time. I'm not going to get into a biology lesson, but I'm pretty sure that record wasn't great. So maybe something just to keep an eye out for. Maybe do your own research into if you are looking to bet Julia Avila. But what's actually crazy is Julia Avila's 35. She's only 2 years younger than Miesha Tate, which is just mental to think about, because obviously Miesha Tate's been around forever. But that's the thing with Julia Avila. It's a bit like, look, age is one thing, but miles on the clock is another. Julia Avila is only 9-2 as a fighter with a professional career, whereas Miesha Tate, like I say, she's been around forever. So Julia Avila, even though Avila is older than you think, at 35 years old, she's still very new in regards to, or very fresh in regards to her MMA career, so I wouldn't let the age throw you too much. But I do think that it's a relatively close fight. Miesha Tate, obviously, coming towards the end of her career, she already retired for a number of years. She did come back and start looking okay, but then the last loss to Lauren Murphy, in my opinion, wasn't a great loss to take. And you just wonder what Tate's got left at this point. And look, like from an experience perspective, she's been around, like I said, for years and fought the best of the best. And, she's definitely got the experience edge over Julia Avila. It's just from a stylistic perspective, Avila's very aggressive. She's very forward pressure. She will close the distance. distance. She'll try and hit you with a ton of volume. It's straight punches. She's got some power as well. And for Tate to win this fight, I kind of feel like she's got to get Avila on the back foot. She's got to get Avila moving backwards. Then that'll allow Tate to not only be comfortable in a striking range, but be able to level change into a wrestling and grappling, which is where I feel that she needs to take this fight in order to win. But if Avila's just aggressive here, landing straight punches down the middle, things up the middle to prevent Tate from shooting takedowns and forcing Tate on the back foot, that's then going to make it really hard for Tate to get a game going. And yeah, I do feel that from a stylistic perspective, from a skill set perspective, Miesha Tate, I think, is probably the better fighter. But stylistically, I think Avila's going to be able to get Tate on the back foot, which is going to nullify some of Tate's strengths, and that's key. So for those reasons, I'm picking Julia Avila to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Cody Brundage versus Zach Reese. Zach Reese, of course, coming from the Contender Series. Cody Brundage coming off a very, very controversial fight that I think lost him a lot of fans. And, you know, you can understand why. Against Jacob Malkoun, there was an apparent illegal blow to the back of the head, and it did look like Cody Brundage milked it and, you know, got Malkoun DQ'd in a fight where Brundage was getting absolutely mauled, and he was also coming into that fight on a 3-fight losing streak. Didn't look overly terrible in the first 2 fights of that 3-fight losing streak, but the Cedriquez Dumas fight, man, he looked absolutely horrific. His corner was having a go at him. Everything his corner was telling him to do, he did the opposite, and it was just a very, very bad fight. Didn't look like he was there mentally at all or physically. And then he goes into the fight with Jacob Malkoun. Malkoun's having his way with him, and like I say, it was a performance that lost him a lot of fans and a lot of respect for what he did, to the point where I'm actually quite surprised that the UFC have given him another fight. And of course, they've given him Zach Reese, and I don't think it's a fight that's unwinnable for Brundage. It's just, where is Brundage actually at? You know, he has got a decent fighter inside of him. We saw him against Rodolfo Vieira. He was doing okay in that fight until the second round, and again made a mistake, and it cost him. But there's a decent fighter in Cody Brundage. It's just, where is he actually at? Because his last 2 performances have been shocking. And the thing is with Zach Reese, he's very tall, he's very long, he's very thick for the division. He's young, he's got good striking. We saw the knockout that he finished Aronov with on the Contender Series, and he's got some wrestling and grappling to go with that as well. It's just the wrestling and grappling, I'm not 100% convinced until I see it that it's going to be enough to stop Brundage if Brundage decides to wrestle and grapple, because that's where Brundage is okay. It's just, I kind of feel like Zach Reese is going to be much sharper, lighter and quicker on the feet, and just pack more power straight down the middle as Brundage is coming forward. So it wouldn't actually shock me to see a Cody Brundage win. I'm going to put that out there. And I kind of feel like a lot of people might let bias and narrative really affect how they feel about Cody Brundage. And look, I get it, he's had 2 really bad performances, but this isn't one of those fights, in my opinion, where the UFC have put an opponent in front of him that's experienced, that's solid everywhere, and that Brundage doesn't have a path to victory against. I think Brundage does have a path to victory against Zach Reese. Do I think he hits it? No. I think Reese hits Brundage before any path to victory of Brundage hits Reese, but the path to victory is there whether you like it or not. So look, I think Brundage is going to get knocked out in this fight, and I do think it's going to be potentially, calling the UFC a day for Brundage after that. But like I say, I wouldn't completely rule Brundage out. I don't think it's like this horrific stylistic matchup, but I do think it's a fight where he gets caught by the younger, hungrier, taller, longer, thicker guy. There's a lot of upside on Zach Reese. It's just, like I've said a million times already during the breakdown, you just can't ignore the path to victory for Brundage. But he has looked, like I said, he's looked really bad lately. So I wouldn't be overly surprised if Brundage won, but I think he gets knocked out. I'm picking Zach Reese to win this fight. And in this next fight, this is a really good fight stylistically. We've got Joe Solecki versus Drakkar Klose. Now, it's a good fight stylistically because Drakkar Klose is really well-rounded. He's a good striker, he's a good wrestler, he's a good grappler. He's fought the higher level of competition than Joe Solecki. Although Joe Solecki's fought some good fighters himself, but Joe Solecki is more of a specialist in that one area, and this is what I'm really interested in, because Joe Solecki's grappling is at a very high level. in regards to MMA at this level. Of course, if he was fighting in the top 10, top 5, 10, 15, whatever, I think the grappling starts to be nullified a little bit. But at this level, I think that against Drakkar Klose, that Joe Solecki can have some success with the grappling. Of course, he's got to get the takedowns first, and that's where it might become a little bit of an issue. But the thing is with Solecki, even if he's not completely successful with your traditional style takedowns, your double legs, your single legs, he will pin you up against the cage and look to sink a hook in and then jump on your back and, start trying to choke you or dragging you down to the mat from there. So he's got ways to get the fights down to the mat. Where I think that Solecki has got issues, and where he's going to have the issues that he's had in previous fights in this fight, is that Solecki always tends to have one round where he's really good, where he's really dominant and his opponent can't do anything. But then he starts slowing down a little bit. Then the takedowns just aren't as... There's not much of an opportunity for the takedowns after that one round that he has success with, and I kind of feel that it's going to be the same here. I do think that Joe Solecki might have that good first opening round against Klose. Maybe he does take his back, and at that point it's going to be very dangerous for Klose. Klose might be in danger of getting submitted. He might actually get submitted, although again I don't see it. I do think Solecki's going to have one round, just like he has in every fight, pretty much every fight, or at least the more recent fights where he's stepping up in competition. But then, like I say, look, Drakkar Klose's wrestling is going to be good enough, in my opinion, to defend the takedowns from Solecki. The more Solecki goes for the takedowns, the more it's going to deplete his gas tank. And then Klose has just got that real grinding ability just to be able to either close the distance, push his opponents back up against the cage if they're slowing down, or even just at boxing range and just picking his opponents apart, using good fundamentals, not really overexerting himself, not loading up too much on power, but just really putting a solid, well-rounded performance together. And like I say, I think that's going to be enough in this fight. I think the defensive wrestling, the defensive grappling, and then the fact that Klose is going to be the better striker with better cardio, I think is going to play into the game of Klose much, much more in this fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Drakkar Klose to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Steve Garcia versus Costa. Now, Steve Garcia is one of these fighters where I think a lot of people expect... I think he came into the UFC on short notice and had one of those fights where, he was never going to win, if you like. I know, obviously, with 4-ounce gloves at this level, anything can happen, but he was in one of those fights on short notice, and I think a lot of people, fans, and maybe myself included to an extent, thinking that, Steve Garcia will probably lose a couple of fights, and, he came in to do a job and, probably won't stick around for too long. But, man, the kid's impressive. He's got awkward movement, he's got strikes from weird angles, he's well-rounded, striking, wrestling, grappling, he's on a 2-fight win streak as well. So, he's a decent fighter. Now, Costa, I think Costa, again, came into the UFC short notice against Thiago Moises. He did get beat, he got ran through, but look, Moises is one of the best in the division. And then Costa's fight after that was Austin Lingo. Looked great in my opinion against Lingo, and I kind of feel that Lingo is probably in that same bracket maybe as Garcia. Maybe Garcia is just one step above, but I think that once Costa has really got his reads in this fight, I think Garcia is going to start better. Like I say, that awkward movement and the lengthy strikes and the strikes coming from weird angles, I think Costa's going to have to, just sit back for a couple of minutes and just really just start to download the data and, make his reads. But I think Costa's just a better fighter. I think his striking is cleaner. I think that he's got power as well, just like Garcia's got power, to be fair. I think that Costa's cardio is a little bit better. I think his wrestling and grappling could potentially be a little bit better. But one thing I will say with Garcia is, again, everything that he does is just awkward. So I do think it's going to be a competitive fight. It's just like I say, I kind of feel that Costa might just be slightly better in pretty much all the aspects of mixed martial arts. Like I say, it's not like he's crazy better in every area, just a little bit, but what that nearly always shows inside the cage is a fighter performing really well because they've just got those slight edges everywhere. Their opponent's struggling to really get at the opponent because they're slightly more deficient in all those areas. And like I say, all the slights make one big, if that makes sense. So I do think that Costa has got a good fight ahead of him here. Like I say, he's just got not to rush. He's got to not rush anything. Got to get his reads in, because Garcia is awkward to figure out. But like I say, I think he's got all the skills to be able to win the fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Costa to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Ihor Potieria versus the newcomer Rodolfo Bellato. Rodolfo Bellato, of course, coming from the Contender Series, as well as most UFC debutants do nowadays. But this fight could be really fun for as long as it lasts. Like, Potieria is really dangerous early, comes out fast, comes out hard, throws a lot of hard strikes, a lot of forward pressure and aggression. And I kind of feel that a lot of fighters tend to accept the fact that they're going to be on the back foot earlier on against Potieria. But the thing is with Potieria, if he can't get you out early, he does slow down, he does gas, he does tire, and that's where opponents can start to really take over the fight. Now, you look at Rodolfo Bellato, he's got a decent gas tank, he's got good volume, he can strike, he's really good inside the clinch as well, loves to throw knees and elbows inside the clinch, and he can really break opponents down. So in this fight, I kind of feel like we're going to see it go a specific way. So I think that Potieria is going to come out fast, he's going to come out hard. I think he's going to have to put a storm on Bellato, and I think Bellato's going to have to weather that storm if he wants to win. And there's every possibility that Potieria takes Bellato out. But Bellato does seem, to me at least, from the tape that I've seen, like he does okay when it comes to taking strikes and having to deal with a little bit of aggression before it's his turn. So I also don't think that Potieria has got this like brutal, extreme, deadly one-touch knockout power that he's going to put everybody away with that he touches. I don't think Potieria is that striker at all. So although there's a possibility of Potieria, being overly aggressive and knocking Bellato out early, I don't think it's an outcome, or I don't think it's a storm that Bellato can't weather. And I do think Bellato's going to weather that storm, and then when it starts coming late and Potieria's tired and Bellato's really grinding away, Potieria's movement and speed drops off, falls off a cliff, and then Bellato's able to, work his way into the clinch, start landing knees and elbows. I think he probably is going to get at Potieria late. So pretty binary fight. I think the fight's going to be finished, but I think it's either going to be Potieria in the first 4 to 5 minutes, or it's going to be Bellato therefore after. And I just feel that the window of opportunity is too small, or smaller than what Bellato's got to work with after that. So for those reasons, I'm picking Rodolfo Bellato to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Wellington Turman versus Jared Gooden. And I think this is going to be a fun fight as well, if I'm being, like I said, the entire card's fun. But yeah, I think it's going to be a fun fight. I don't have a great deal of trust in either fighter, though. I think Wellington Turman has got good skills, but coming off a 2-fight losing streak, I think there's fights where, he has made some questionable decisions. Jared Gooden, on the other side, I think he's a well-rounded fighter, powerful. It sounds like he's a really fun character as well, with a good personality. But again, he's had fights where he's made questionable decisions, and it's one of those fights that I think is going to be competitive, and I think all it's going to take is one mistake or one unforced error, and the other one could capitalise. If there is no errors, I do think Wellington Turman's the better fighter, technically, and more well-rounded. Like, he's striking, I don't think he's got the power or explosivity of Jared Gooden. In fact, I know he hasn't, but I do think Turman's technical skill set is better from a striking perspective. Then you look at the wrestling. Again, I don't think either fighter here has a massive edge in the wrestling, but the one thing that I do like about Turman, and go back and listen to all the breakdowns I've ever made with him, I think this is the one thing that he's very, very good at, and that's his clinch work. He's so tricky to deal with in the clinch, and I don't feel like I've said this about many other fighters, but Turman genuinely does a really good job of, once he's in the clinch, fighting his underhooks and sneaking around the back and getting trips, and he's just very, very difficult to deal with in the clinch. He's a real good clinch battler, and I think that could be key here, because even if he's not the better wrestler, he could get close to Gooden, start on the clinch, and then either look to get a drag down, a trip, or even hop on Gooden's back whilst he's stood up and then get the fight down that way, or stay on his back for a round looking to choke him. And then where I do think the biggest gap in skill is in this fight is within the jiu-jitsu. I think that Turman's jiu-jitsu is going to be, offensively, is going to cause Gooden problems defensively. And if the fight does hit the mat, then I think Turman can have success on the mat. I think he could potentially submit Gooden or get him out of there on the mat as well. Whilst it's on the feet, I do feel that Gooden's going to be slightly more aggressive, and the power's going to be on the upside of Gooden as well. So I think for as long as it's on the feet, maybe Gooden's got the slight advantage, even though he's, in my opinion, he's not as technically skilled of a striker as Turman. I do think that Gooden has the slight upside on the feet, but once the fight gets into close quarters, the clinch, and if we see some offensive and defensive jiu-jitsu here, if the fight hits the mat, I think that Turman's really going to shine there. So I think it's a close fight. I think it's going to be competitive, but from a pick and prediction, I'm picking Wellington Turman to win this fight. And in the final fight to break down, we've got Jamey-Lyn versus Veronica Hardy. And it's an interesting fight. I feel that, again, when it comes to consistency, I think Veronica Hardy struggles a little bit. Like, she has losses to Ashley Evans-Smith, who I don't rate at all, and Bea Malecki, but then she'll have wins over Poliana Viana and Juliana Miller, fights where she was relatively sized as an underdog. So the consistency is a little inconsistent for Veronica Hardy, whereas Jamey-Lyn, I don't feel like she's fought those level of opponents, because like Hardy's also fought like your Gillian Robertsons as well, who again is a good fighter. She's fought decent fighters. She's been in the UFC for a while. I don't think Jamey-Lyn has fought that level of competition at the UFC level for long enough to really gauge whether she could be consistent or not. So I think we're still in a little bit of unknown water with Horth of whether she is actually, legit or not in regards to not UFC caliber. She looks like she's UFC caliber. When I say legit, I mean, is she going to be a fighter that is going to make her way into the rankings? And we just don't know that yet. Again, it's uncharted territory, but we'll find out over the next few fights. I just kind of feel that with Veronica Hardy, though, even though she's been a little bit inconsistent, she has had good wins, which means that she's got a good skill set and she is performing, at least every other fight. So I think that with the experience that she's got, the time that she's been training, the people that she's been around as well, when there's a fighter that I'm a little bit unsure about until I see a little bit more from, which basically describes Horth and how I feel about her, I do and will always tend to lean on the side of experience and longevity and at the top of the sport in the UFC. So yeah, it's a close fight. I wouldn't be surprised with any outcome here. I just need to see more from Horth to be able to pick her confidently against a fighter that has been in the UFC for a long time and has got wins against good fighters in the division. She's also got losses against fighters she should have been beaten as well, and that's why I think that the betting lines are close. Hardy did open up around a plus 150 underdog. The money's come back in on her. It's gone into a pick'em, slightly flipped in some places with Hardy minus 120, Horth at minus 110. So I do agree with that line movement, but I think it's lined where it should be now, just because there are some unknowns on Horth's side and the fact that Hardy can be a little bit inconsistent at times. So for those reasons, in regards to me siding with experience and longevity at the top of the sport, I'm picking Veronica Hardy to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. A little bit longer than normal, actually. We've just exceeded 50 minutes, so apologies about that. But there was 13 fights, and it's a really good card, and there was some fights on this card that I wanted to spend longer on just because of how well matched the fights are and how excited I am to actually watch the fights. But as always, thank you for tuning in, whether you're on one of the podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, or any of the other podcast platforms. And if you're on YouTube, again, please drop a subscription to the channel. It really does help. If you want to comment, tell me who you're betting on, tell me who you're confident on, tell me who you're not confident on, who you're excited to see. I'll always try and get back to the comments. It is me that does reply to the replies. So yeah, I'll always try my best to get back to you, and I do appreciate any comments. And again, thank you for tuning in. I'm Newsom, and I'll see you again next week.